Historically, Black Americans are underrepresented in decision-making positions in one of the country's most important institutions, the news media. But why does it remain this way? Is it denial and unawareness of the status quo? Here's Vincent McCraw, president of the Detroit branch of the National Association of Black Journalists.
Unfortunately, over the years, I think it's a little of both. I think newsrooms have been in denial for a long time. And now when we see the culmination of these events just this year with the pandemic, the protests, and some violence related to racial justice issues around the country, and even this election now, it's even more important that the voices of journalists, Black journalists in particular, and people of color be in these newsrooms, not only just in reporting positions, but in the news-making, decision-making positions.
Objective observation is a cornerstone of journalism. If newsroom directors don't understand or acknowledge that if all observers are the same and thus what they consider to be objective is the same, then this can lead to incomplete stories or coverage that may miss the point entirely.
Many are starting to understand. Many do understand and have understood for a long time, but then they lose their way. What they all should be looking for and understanding is that we as Black journalists and journalists of color, the life experiences, the lived experiences that they bring to a newsroom, the way they see a community, the way they cover a community. And it doesn't mean that there's, and that's not to suggest that they'll cover it any different than any journalist would cover a community. But when you bring your lived experiences to the job, then you have your, there's a different eye. There's a different,
right.
You see something that a white journalist is not going to see.
That difference in life experience can be seen in moments like when CNN reporter Omar Jimenez is arrested live on air. The anchor doesn't address the fact that the police arrest people with little to no explanation regularly, an observed truth in the Black community.
We don't know why they're being arrested. They're not being given any explanation, as far as we can hear, for why they're being arrested. We don't know why they're being handcuffed.
Or when senior writer for The Root, Michael Harriot, was arrested.
They're asking if he's media. He says he is.
I wasn't the only one who didn't have visible credentials. I wasn't the only one who was filming. The only thing that distinguished me from the other people in that area was that I was Black.
And the reason that Michael and the other they weren't surprised is because it's a part of their lived experience. Either in their own private lives, it may not have been them who's been arrested or harassed by police, but someone close to them, some relative. And frankly, many of us, particularly many of us Black men, have been pulled over by the police for something.
A new survey from the Knight Foundation and Gallup shows 79% of Americans feel news organizations should increase diversity among their staffs to better reflect the makeup of the U.S. population. I spoke with Michael McCarter, a managing editor at the USA Today Network, about the role of diversity, standards, and ethics in the media. So this is a pretty challenging time to be a Black journalist in America. Not that there's an unchallenging time to be a Black journalist in America, but this is a particularly challenging time. But it's also a challenging time for newsrooms and the people who inhabit newsrooms, whether they be Black or white, to make decisions about how to cover African Americans, African American issues, things like police brutality and systemic racism. I want to start with just your reaction to the way that American media is handling this moment.
Well, I don't want to paint anything with a broad brush, but I will say, because everybody's handling things in their own way, just depending on what corner of the country you're in. I will say that I am actually rather impressed that it has received the attention that it has, because there have been times previously where any issue like this would get tamped down simply because it got zero coverage or very minimal coverage. Now, Could I say that everything has been handled fairly? No, absolutely not. There are some markets where sometimes you can see bias seep into some of the coverage. But overall, I'm impressed, especially because it's been 90 days, more than 90 days. And the coverage is still there. It hasn't gone away. The flavor, it hasn't been one of those flavor of the week, and they've moved on to the next thing.
Yeah, you and I have worked in newsrooms a long time, and so we know how things work and how decisions get made. But give our viewers a sense of the way in which these issues get discussed and sort of debated in newsrooms as you're thinking about coverage, and how prominent Black voices are in those discussions and in those decisions.
Well, again, it depends on what newsroom you're in and what company you work for and what part of the country you're in. Because if you are fortunate enough to have a newsroom that has diversity, and there's not just diversity in the room, but you have diversity in leadership ranks and decision-making ranks, you can have more thoughtful conversations about how to approach the storytelling of these issues of today. And you can also have very thoughtful and considerate conversations about once the reporters come back about how these stories are going to be presented.